So in the last stretch of 2025, I posted my first ever original comic, or at least it was supposed to be my first original comic before I found out about a webtoon challenge and decided to enter it as practice. Of course, my two comics from this year, Playing Mermaids and Soul Searching, aren't my first ever attempts at comic creation. I used to make a ton back when I was what, 6, 7, no, okay, not saying that next number, but it was around that point in time, okay? I also made a Camp one-shot comic right before quarantine started and a Danny Phantom AU called Jumpstart that I did abandon, but it's still a comic that I did, in fact, work on. And then, of course, some mini comics sprinkled here and there, not too many though. So, by all means, I'm not new to this, but still new enough that I consider myself a beginner comic creator. So, with all this under my belt, I thought it'd be fun to look back on my progress and think about what I could improve on and what tips I give to other new comic creators. Some tips from one beginner to another. But before we get any further, hi, hello, I'm Mika and I make art and commentary videos on top of running a small art business where I sell stickers, art prints, acrylic charms, and button pins. Now, without further ado, let's just jump straight into the video. To start us off, let's talk about what I'm drawing. Right here is the speed paint for my cover for Soul Searching. The comic's description reads, "New to the reaping profession, Maxwell must come to terms with his role and take the life of a young child." In case you were curious about what the comic was about. The cover was made before I drew out any of the pages, so you might have noticed that Maxwell's hair is more straight than curly. Yeah, he got just a minuscule little redesign as I started to actually get my pages done. I thought the bigger hair was more fun to draw, my bad. Anyway, self-promo aside, let's talk about the actual comic making process and my tips. So I believe I mentioned this in my 2025 art fight prep video, but originally this had been a short film script I had written for a class back in 2023. It was homework, I handed in, it got marked, and then proceeded to basically forget about it for the rest of the year because I had 9 billion other things to write. But then I graduated, had time to settle back into a routine that didn't require me to constantly be writing, and then realized I could finally make a webcomic. So I went back to writing. Actually, a bit of an exaggeration. In 2024, I basically just reworked the short film script into a comic format. I used this stage to plan out how many panels would go in each page, editing out any references to active motion, editing out any unnecessary dialogue, and then editing out any fluff that I had included in the actual short film script because I did not want to draw all that. So it was a lot of editing stuff out. Luckily for me, my friend Ransom was open to beta reading my script, and after getting some editing notes from them, it was finally done. Originally, the script was also done for a class that had meant to simulate a writer's room, so I was lucky enough to get a lot of critique on it, even before this point, which I really do suggest if you want to write any type of story. Yes, I know, it's hard to reach out to others and have them read an incredibly rough version of your work. I struggle with this myself, but I swear it's worth it. Obviously, not everyone is going to have a room full of people who are literally obligated to give you criticism, but even just 1 or 2 people giving you advice does wonders for your work. If you don't want to contact somebody you know personally, you could join Discord servers dedicated to comic creation and reach out in a channel, or even just post about it online. Those first 2 are more shots in the dark, where you are just hoping for the best and hoping somebody reaches out to you to say, "Hey, I want to beta read your work, it looks really interesting." But it's better than nothing. I've gotten responses before. Granted, the response I got was for a comic that I never ended up posting, but we don't need to worry about that. Tapas also has its own comic forum, which might also be a pretty good place where people will be super receptive to you asking for a beta reader. Moving on from script writing, let's talk about concept art. My one and only thing I want to say about this topic is don't be like me. I hate concept art. It's my worst enemy. I just want to jump in and just work on my pages, but unfortunately it's hard to do that when you don't know what anything looks like. So I did plan some things out. I mentally compiled some points of inspiration for this comic, most notably my Grim Reaper office aesthetic taking inspiration from Black Butler and the Adventure Zone balance, while souls were vaguely inspired by Soul Eater. I know you probably can't tell, but the anime was on my mind every time I drew a soul, I swear. Also, don't mentally compile inspiration. It's probably a lot better to put them on Pinterest board or a Milanote folder. Anyways, I also planned out character references, making a rough lineup in both their actual color palette and the black and white version. I also made some rough layouts for each room so I knew where everything was. These weren't that detailed, and I think that really bit me in the ass by the end of everything, since I kept forgetting the shape of Elizabeth's headboard and kept drawing it rounder than it actually was. Long story short, make proper concept art for your story. My comic wasn't that long, so I was able to kind of get away with it, but I'll probably be more thorough for longer works. Okay, so I always thumbnail projects when they're big like this. I also usually thumbnail no matter what, but that's not the point. My thumbnailing process did wonders figuring out what other fluff I needed to cut out. Like, in the original script, I had some unnecessary panels that showcased in-between movements that really just weren't necessary in comic form. Like, I got rid of a whole page because I really just didn't need it. I ended up making 2 drafts of my thumbnails and sent it off to Ransom again to look over to see if my quick doodles made sense. And then I also sent them off to my other friend who had no idea what my script was about. I did this to try and double down on checking if my drawings were readable to somebody who didn't have any context behind them, to see if he could get the gist of what was going on. Of course, he didn't understand everything. I mean, could you guess that this was a Grim Reaper story by looking at this and only this? No, I didn't think so. But what matters most is that he understood that this whole comic was about a worker having a conversation with another who seemed to be in a not too great position. Visuals are incredibly important, especially with comics, so making sure your story can translate to the viewer even without dialogue is integral. Also, make sure to use your thumbnailing process to also plan out where your speech bubbles are gonna go. I didn't do this for playing mermaids, and you can really tell since they take up so much of my panel's backgrounds, but my speech bubbles and soul searching fit a lot nicer, I think. I hope? So my creation progress for these pages was a bit erratic. I started out pretty consistent. I would draw out pages, line, and color them basically all in one go, and then classes started up and started to kick my ass a bit. Luckily, I was able to utilize the time in between lecture and tutorial to sketch out a good chunk of my pages on my tablet, even use this step to double down on cutting out extra panels I just didn't need. But then I ran out of things to work on once I got through all of them. The only drawing app I have on my tablet is Ibis Paint, and I really don't like the feel of it after like a decade of Clip Studio Paint, basically. I should really just fork over the cash and get Procreate, but I love procrastinating, so I probably won't do that for the next little bit. Anyways, point is, I would transfer my sketches to Clip Studio Paint and then line and color them whenever I had downtime at home. Fortunately, class starting up again also meant I wasn't able to work on things as consistently as before and fell behind on my pages. Which leads me to my next tip, buffer pages. This is such a basic thing, but having a few pages done in advance before you start posting does wonders, I swear. I fell behind a little in terms of posting when school started up again, but I was still able to update my comic because I had my stuff ready to go. Another tip I think I'd give for page creation would be to make things as easy on yourself as possible. I was originally going to color everything, but decided against going full color in order to save myself time. Instead, I used black and white, 2 shades of gray, and occasionally some blue. This made things a lot easier when it came to page creation since I didn't need to constantly be flipping through color palettes or even shading. So if your comic isn't hurt by only coloring in black and white or grayscale, make it black and white or grayscale. While I haven't made anything longer than like Jumpstart or Soul Searching yet, I can't even imagine how long they would have taken me if I had fully colored them. Okay, this is another do as I say, not as I do section, and it's about promoting your comic online. Post about it on things like Blue Sky, Tumblr, Instagram. Discord servers a lot of the time also have self-promo channels that you can send your work to. Don't be too nervous about being loud about your work like I was. If you don't talk about it, nobody will know it's there. And those are my tips. Not too long a video. Again, I'm a beginner, so I don't have as thorough of a knowledge about this as others might. But maybe that's what you need if you're also new to comic creation. Maybe you just needed something simple. I actually wrote this script right after wrapping up and scheduling my last soul searching pages, so these are like fresh pieces of advice. But what about you? Have you made a comic? Do you have any pieces of advice? Please feel free to give them or talk about your comic in the comment section below, because God knows I need more tips on comic creation. Please. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. I make art and commentary videos, and your support would mean the world to me. If you want to see more of me, you can find my socials and comics in the description below, alongside my Etsy, where I sell stickers, art prints, acrylic charms, and button pins. I believe that's all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye!